Welcome back to the program. Glad you're with us. Please say good morning to my very good friend Emil Lee. Now, time for St. Martin Insights, the St. Martin Insights news that matters to you. Good morning, sir. How are you?
Great, Sock. Good morning. Good morning, listeners. Nice to be here again.
Glad you're here. Glad you're here. And I think we have all this now streaming in real time on Facebook, island92.com, and watch and chat on our Listen Live page, and and now on YouTube. So
Super high tech. Very
yeah.
cool.
Well, let's keep our fingers crossed. But
And
yeah,
we do podcasts now too.
yeah. Well, of course, all of that. It's always out there on the whole thing is always out there on the website for sure.
Super.
Anyway, so what happened yesterday at the Council of Ministers? And I saw you were also with the Prime Minister from the Netherlands as well.
Correct. So yesterday was a busy day. So yesterday in Council of Ministers, we had Justice, Vromi, and Finance. And so they gave some updates. And actually, this was before. If you know, last night there was a fire in the prison in Point Blanche. So that's probably making the news this morning. I haven't really gone through the papers too much, but yesterday the Minister of Justice was talking about guns. You know, there was an incident. I guess it was earlier this week where apparently a 14-year-old child was on a school bus with a handgun, and it's like it's really kind of crazy that kids are taking guns to school, right? I mean, that's very worrisome.
Absolutely.
And if you sort of put that into context, I think the week before, the Minister of VSA was talking about increases of mental health issues. So I don't know how to take that. So you could take it as, one, that there's an indication that there's a lot more mental health cases out there, or the possibility is that there were always a lot of mental health cases out there and they weren't getting the attention they need, and now they're getting the attention they need. So I think the ministry needs to explain better how they interpret the data, right? I mean, numbers don't lie, but you know, what does it really mean? They need to put that, I think, into a better context.
I don't necessarily disagree. I'd like to. You make a statement. I'd like to understand the numbers and the analysis
Exactly.
behind the statement, and but
And
that's
that's
just
what we do. We
that's
try
just
and make it relevant to our listeners and say, you know, look, I'm not sure how to interpret this. Is this a good thing or a bad thing, right? Is it so we will
well.
drill into it next
Well,
time
I
he's
mean,
in.
I don't think it's in this particular arena, in this particular topic, right, or concept, it's probably never a good thing. But
But
the
it is
but
good if it means they're getting more access to
right,
health.
but what it means is that we need to understand, what was the baseline, and it went from X to Y, and what was the cause of it going from X to Y. Those
Right.
are the things that I think we need to really understand to be able to make a good assessment.
I agree. I agree. So Minister of Finance came and she talked about, so you know that there's, and we've talked about this a couple of times, that there's problems approving the 2025 budget. We're almost halfway through the year and trying to approve the budget for this year,
It's
right?
shameful. It's
Shameful.
shameful.
And so they've been going back and forth. And apparently, the decision from the Minister of Finance, they were going to make some budget amendments and go back to Parliament with an updated budget for new discussion. They've decided that they're going to only include the amendments that were made when they originally passed the budget. So just for people to understand, the budget was proposed in, I guess, December, January. They debated in Parliament. During that procedure, a couple of amendments were made in through that deliberation process.
Mm-hmm.
And then apparently those amendments were not properly reflected in the budget, and then for technical reasons wasn't approved and sent back, and that's what started this whole thing. So now they're just going to go with the amendments that were already approved before. And I believe the thinking is, folks, to the other members of Parliament, you already approved this, so let's just, sort of stamp it, get it going. And I think, honestly, that's a pretty naive approach
Mm-hmm.
because Parliament is political. You're going to get. So first, they didn't have their governing program together when they first debated the budget. So now you're going to get a whole discussion about, okay, does the budget reflect the governing program? They're going to want their pound of flesh for you being, sort of. They're going to say that the Minister of Finance messed up the process, and now we're 5 months later, and so to expect that it's not going to be a bit of a circus, I think, is unrealistic, and I don't think this is a practical approach. She should have. If you're going back to Parliament, you have new facts, new requests. Just update it, bite the bullet, and I think that what I have the sense is we're seeing is that they're constantly sort of running from confrontation instead of just dealing with it head on. I think if they knew there was a technical issue in February, they should have just said, okay, let's just go back to Parliament. Instead of trying to figure out how not to go back to Parliament.
Well, I'm sorry. Because you didn't know how to incorporate the amendments into your spreadsheet.
Right.
This is not. I don't understand um, why it just doesn't add up to me, right? That this is a technical issue.
But you know what? It is what it is. And
Yeah.
if legally they have to go back, just go back. I don't see why delay. And, this is affecting, like, for example, there's marketing initiatives from the Ministry of thTat that are delayed, not approved because of the budget, apparently. So, it just holds things back. And I think, just take your blows and do the right thing.
Well, yeah, it's not rocket science here. This is our projected revenues. These are our projected expenditures, and here's the actual, right? Come on, let's stop horsing around.
Right. So why are you going to go back with a budget that you know isn't up to date? You're going to have to come with amendments later in the year, and actually, you need to do the 2026 budget. So just bite the bullet, finish with 2025, and start working on 2026 now.
And when you're halfway through 2026. So when you get or 2025. So when you get 2025 done, you have actuals for the first 6 months of the year.
Mm-hmm.
Put those in. See what you forecast out what the rest of this year is going to look like.
Mm-hmm.
With reality, and at the same time, then when you get to build yourself out with the forecast from July through December 2025, immediately start to cast the budget for 2026.
Right.
It's not rocket science.
Right.
I could build I could take a stab right now. What are you, 5 months into 2025?
Mm-hmm.
I could forecast out the remaining 7 months of 2025 and build my 2026 budget.
Right.
And you know what? I'm way early, so I might be off. But this is not rocket science.
Right.
It's not rocket science. It's incredibly frustrating to me, if you can't tell by the tone of my voice, that we have this same problem. It doesn't matter who's sitting in government, whether it's this coalition, another coalition, or anybody else. We seem to have this same problem year after year after year.
And to our listeners, I know talking about budgets and finance is not necessarily the most exciting thing, but it's really important that the public understands this. So there's a part 2 to this discussion. So this came in the question and answer period, right? So the CFT, it's the body that regulates government's financial administration, let's say.
Mm-hmm.
They've brought up that there's a number of loans coming up that the country St. Maarten owes that St. Maarten will not be able to pay. So I did the calculations. They say St. Maarten's debt to GDP ratio is now about 49%, which means the country owes about $580 million
Mm-hmm.
to others. Okay. But in this, they talk about what they call a bullet loan. So I guess, what would you call it? A balloon that you just, so what they do is they only pay interest
Interest only.
interest only, and then at the end of the loan,
That's a big
they have to pay
everything.
all the principal.
Yeah, big balloon payment at the
Right.
end.
So it's a the thing is, and so why this is important is apparently what government does is they put the interest payments in their budget, right? So as they're doing their annual budget, they say, okay, we need to pay whatever, $1 million in interest this year on the loan, and they put that in the budget. But they don't put in anything in the budget to put money together to pay back that principal that they're going to owe at the end of the loan. So, which is why when the loan comes due, there's no money to
Right.
pay back the money that they owe.
Well, one of the things that you typically do, right, when you in the business world, right, is you budget your expenses for the year, and in the case of with a loan, you put the current maturity of long-term debt, that portion of principal that you're repaying this year gets set aside as your budget, right? Or in your budget as an expenditure. In this case, there is no current maturity of long-term debt because they're only paying interest. But at the same time, it would be prudent that every year, as part of your budget, that you are setting aside money in your operational budget that gets set aside in escrow to pay off the long-term debt. So if you have 5 years to pay it off, and 4 years and 11 months of it are interest only, well, then you have to figure out how much every month do I have to put aside over that 5 year period, so that when I get to the end of year 5 and month 12 of year 5, that, oh my, what I hear, I've paid all my interest, and by the way, here's the principal that I owe you. This is called good budgeting. This is called sound fiscal management, and we clearly don't have the ability to do that.
So for me, this is really scary. So CFT is saying, look, you need to change your loan structure. So just like everyone else, like if you borrow money for a house, for a car, most people pay interest and they pay back a portion of the money that they borrowed.
Well, you amortize the
Right.
loan,
So at the
principal
end,
interest over a period of years.
at the end of your payments that you've agreed to, whatever, let's say a 5-year, 10-year period, you've paid back everything. You paid back the money you borrowed and you've paid back the interest that you've agreed to, right? But if government does this, all of a sudden their budget that they have available to spend for roads and education and everything is going to be dramatically reduced. So, this is kind of scary. It's a house of cards, and as they're making this more clear, government is going to find that they have less money for the things they need to do, and
Well,
that's a concern.
well, and then of course, when you look at the way government earns its revenue, right? It's by charging taxes to the folks that are here, according to, and making sure that people comply with the tax law. And our level of compliance is horribly low. And there's so much low hanging fruit.
Well, it's great you mention it. So I found a report from the IMF from September of last year that talks about the Airbnb, the short-term rentals.
Yeah,
And they estimated, I think, that government loses about $15 million a year
I saw that.
in room tax and in the side businesses, right? So when the people come, they go to restaurants, they
Right.
rent a car. So they estimate that St. Martin loses $15 million a year. And so I asked the minister, I said, look, your proposed tourism tax, you need a legislative change. You need to go through Parliament. You need to debate it in order to collect that money. This is already on the books. This is an enforcement issue to just go after this money, right? So why aren't you doing that? She said, oh, we set up a work group and they had one meeting. I'm like, if I had $15 million on the street, I'd be out there tomorrow banging
if I
on
had
doors.
15 million bucks on the street of revenue that's there that I'm just not collecting because I'm not competent enough to enforce the tax law, That's a huge problem.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So I asked her, I said, look, I would like to have a much better understanding of St. Martin's debts that they owe. For example, are you including the debts from the government owned companies like the airport, the harbor? You owe a ton of money to SZV. Is that incorporate? Because there's no loan agreement for that. They just don't pay what they owe, right?
Right.
So that builds up. Is there interest due on that? Are you going, so how is that working? So she's agreed that she will give an overview, and I'm honestly really scared about what we're going to get back.
Yeah, it's really quite troublesome. And what like the whole room tax with vacation rentals, short-term vacation rentals, on that front, right? For those of us that actually pay our tax,
Hmm.
um, it it's very upsetting that others are just getting away without paying
And
it.
it's especially upsetting because they want to raise the taxes because they're not getting enough money, right? So the people that are paying are just
Mhm.
going to end up paying more,
Right.
and instead of going after the people who aren't paying what they owe. And then the problem is, 'cause both of us have rentals. The people who don't pay their taxes can rent their place cheaper than you do because you have to pay your taxes. And so, you know, it creates an unfair playing field. So you're disadvantaged both paying taxes and also losing business because they can rent their places cheaper than you can.
Yet we seem to be very competent in the tax department in sending out bogus assessments. I gotta
Every
say,
apartment building you go to, I just see mailboxes just stuffed, with assessments overflowing. It's hysterical. It's
hang
not
on,
hysterical. It's sad.
hang on, bear with me. Hey, here we go. I got an assessment not too long ago. 200. It was 200,000 guilders, and I'm like, what's this based on? and no, and so we objected. And meanwhile, I've filed tax returns all the time, and all I get finally I get a letter back. This time, at least now, it's finally in English. It used to always be in Dutch. It was 200,000 guilders, and now was 200,000 guilders, and now, or I'm assuming the Dutch word WORDT means now. But let me look that up, and now it's all zero. It appears that the assessment was imposed unjustly. Therefore, the assessment will be voided. I'm like,
Yeah,
so the amount of time it
but
took them to
it
do
costs
this,
you money
right,
to answer them because you
right.
want to get an accountant because you don't want to make a mistake and you want to deal with it professionally. And so it costs a lot of money. They just send out, random
Yeah.
bills.
Right.
Yeah.
So what WRDT means is becoming.
Hmm.
So it was 200,000 guilders and is now becoming zero. So
Yeah.
so I had to pay an accountant to
Yeah.
write
Exactly.
the objection,
Right.
and then of course they said that it cost them time and money to actually mail me the assessment. Then I have to pay an accountant to object to it. I have to read it, have the accountant read it, his time to object, so that they can then file the objection, so that someone in the tax office can review it and go, yeah, what the hell were we doing? And now reduce it to zero because they screwed up, and then send me another piece of paper that says that it's zero. I mean, how silly is this?
Right. Right.
Just plain ridiculous. Anyway, let me do this, Emil. It is 8:35. Yeah, here's everything that's happening tonight. Here's your Amstel Bright entertainment calendar. We come back, more St. Martin Insights, news that matters to you, with my good buddy Emil Lee. Welcome back to the program 839 right here in the Northeast Caribbean. Emil Lee is with us as we go through St. Martin Insights news that matters to you. I guess we have to talk a little bit about what happened up at Point Blanche yesterday. I mean, here's what I know. I know that yesterday afternoon I heard all the fire trucks go like
Mm-hmm.
crazy,
Mm-hmm.
and that there were video circulating of fire inside the prison. I spoke to folks that I know that live in the area. It was pretty smoky. Black smoke billowed out of Point Blanche prison on Wednesday afternoon after inmates set fire to part of the country's only long-term detention facility. A video taken inside the prison depicted a group of inmates huddled near a cell while fire burned in the hallway of their cell block. Now that's also a little scary. Fire trucks were dispatched to the scene, and a large contingent of law enforcement officers were called to quell the unrest. Officers of the St. Martin Police Force, the KPSM, and the Royal Dutch Marches were seen making their way to the prison late Wednesday afternoon, as well as members of the St. Martin Volunteer Corps, the VKS. Three unmarked vehicles were all clad with black-clad Alpha Team officers were also racing down Nisbet Road towards Point Blanche. Mountain Dud Road, the road leading to the prison, was temporarily closed as several police officers were stationed. excuse me, stationed uh, at the entrance to stop traffic. Order was restored around 6 p.m. and all prisoners are safe and accounted for, Justice Minister Natalie Tackling said in a statement. Ambulance personnel treated 3 inmates for minor injuries. A spokesperson for Justice Minister Natalie Tackling told the Daily Herald there were no reported injuries to law enforcement, according to police spokesman Joe Josepha. Tackling said she has requested help from the military to secure the prison and maintain order. A detachment of the Royal Dutch Marines is currently stationed here. The safety of public prison staff and detainees remains our top priority. We will not tolerate lawlessness, and we're taking all necessary measures to maintain control and uphold the rule of law. Minister Tackling went on to say. Tackling and KPSM's management held an emergency crisis meeting at the prison late Wednesday. Prime Minister Dr. Luc Marcelina was reportedly also in attendance. The extent of the facility's damage still must be assessed, but none of the prison's 80 inmates have been moved to police cells in Phillipsburg and in Simpson Bay as of 8:30 p.m. last night, according to Tackling's spokesperson. The cause of Wednesday's unrest could not be confirmed up to press time of the Daily Herald, but the inmates have complained for years about the deplorable conditions and lack of proper facilities at Point Blanche Prison. The prison is also faced with capacity issues, which has led some prison sentences not being enforced due to a shortage of cells. The prosecutor told the newspaper last year that there are hundreds still waiting to be called to prison. There have been a number of instances of number of inmates being released early to free up space, such as last year's case of a repeat carnionist just being released early. So you know, my initial reaction when I saw the fire
Mm-hmm.
and heard about the fire was something I won't repeat publicly because it will sound horribly crass.
Hmm.
But you know, this whole notion that if you do crime and you go to prison and you get to be in this country club of a facility, and you get to have all of these activities and things to do, I struggle with that. I
But
struggle with
I don't think it is
it's
anywhere close
no, no, no.
to a country club.
No, it's certainly not.
It's
But
it's
you
it's
you
missing so much actually.
you end up in jail. You end up in prison. You get 3 meals a day and a bed.
Hmm.
Maybe we'll give you a book to read. think about what you've done and figure out how you're not going to do
So
it
so
again.
the thing
I
is,
have
and
no
because
use for
I've been
this.
digging into the issue a little bit, there's no psychosocial help
Mm.
for the inmates. There's very little in terms of re-education possibilities. So ultimately, look, people, they've committed a crime, they go there to serve time. But if there isn't an effort to rehabilitate, they're going to come out and actually end up as probably harder criminals than when they went in. So,
But here's what I struggle with. So we've spent time with Alesko
uh-huh,
Violenas,
uh-huh,
who talked about how there wasn't much there,
correct.
but yet he was able to not only educate himself, learn how to play musical instruments, and he wrote and he ultimately wrote a book.
Right,
So if he can do it, obviously other people can too if they want to.
right, right. But the fact is, some people need help to get there, and if there aren't those resources to help them, I understand that it's a challenge. So, and I think, Sock, if you give them those access to those um, programs and they don't take advantage of it, I fully agree with you. Then it's on you that you didn't use the time to make yourself um, a better, uh, more productive person in our community, and then that's on you. But I do know from doing some research that sadly they're not getting um, access to the programs that they need.
I don't disagree.
Yeah. So a
Um,
couple things before we, because I know we're going to run short on time. I did ask our Minister of Romy about the sailboat on the beach. I've gotten a number of comments about that. And while, we've spoken to him about it before and was under the impression it was really just sort of waiting for an advice from the ministry, yesterday when he talked about it, it became more clear that they need permission from the owner, that it's a more complicated process. And for me, that's very frustrating because this is something that's been dealt with in the past, that especially in hurricane season, boats that come in basically should sign sort of a waiver or an agreement with the country that says, look, if something happens to your boat, you have X amount of time to deal with it. And after that, it becomes, you give, permission to the government to deal with your wreckage. I mean, we've had stuff sitting in the lagoon for a long time. It should be, other islands have managed this process in a way that, the removal of car wrecks, boat wrecks, these types of things that are a public hazard, are happen much faster.
well, the first of all, I understand that there's questions about who actually owns that boat.
Mm,
Does it belong to the Frenchman who supposedly gave it? Does it still belong to the Frenchman, even though the Frenchman supposedly gave it to a VKS officer?
right,
Well, where's the paperwork for any of that? Where's the trail for any of that? And at the end of the day, it's creating a public hazard on
correct.
a public beach, and the government has a duty and a responsibility to deal with it. And the fact that it's been there for almost a year and a half is unacceptable on every level.
I agree. And something, doing the right thing shouldn't be so complicated, right? Being good should be the path of least resistance. And
Yeah.
so that's very frustrating to me indeed, because the boat's just disintegrating, you're getting pieces of the boat and any kind of a swells on the beach. And so, it's sad that indeed doing what's right, what's good for the health of the community is just too complicated.
I I completely agree. I completely agree.
So another topic that came up. So actually, one of the colleagues from the Daily Herald was asking about some of these new development projects, but she made a statement in her question
Mhm.
about how people were paying money, not via the notary, to developers as they're beginning construction of projects, right? So in other words, somebody has plans, they want to build a condominium building, and buyers who are interested will pay deposits
Mhm.
to purchase the unit. So this is actually regulated by law in St. Martin. And for me, I need to look it up, but I think all those transactions are supposed to go via the notary. If you remember, there's I think the Carbon Group, they did these
Hmm.
apartments up on the hillside in Cole Bay. So the danger to buyers is as they're building multiple buildings, they sell deposits for future units. And if they don't manage their money well, if they don't manage their costs well,
If they run out.
what happens is they end up using the deposits from future units to finish the construction of current stuff. And it eventually, actually, perhaps not intentionally, but it becomes basically a Ponzi scheme, right?
Hmm.
So they run out of money. People have committed to buying and put money down to buy units, and then the developers can't finish and can't deliver it, right? So St. Martin actually had adjusted the law. I thought so. So they're going to come back to me in next week in press. Um, because indeed it's something they're looking into. I said, who's regulating this? It's easy to make a law, but if nobody controls it, if nobody's regulating it, in the end, you're not protecting the consumers. You're not protecting the people who are buying units.
Agreed.
So
Agreed.
that's worrisome because there are some new projects coming up, and that I understood what the colleague was saying is that people are selling pre-construction and they don't even have the building permits yet.
That's a problem.
So, buyers beware. Make sure you're, familiar with how things work in St. Martin before you go, plunk down your money to buy something that may or may not come together as you hope it will.
Agreed.
Well,
Agreed. So we have invited, just so everybody knows, next week and the week after, you and I are going to be. I'm going to be in Connecticut. You're going to be here. We're
mm-hmm,
doing things remotely,
mm-hmm,
so we'll cover what happens during the council minister's press briefing and get into some of the issues. And then the week after, we've extended an invitation to Minister Patrice Gums, the Minister of Rami, to join us in the studio.
mm-hmm.
And so hopefully he will be able to join us, and that's the 5th of June.
Right.
If my calendar is remotely close.
Mm-hmm.
And that it was a
So just real quick,
yeah.
yesterday we also met. I met with the Prime Minister from the Netherlands and the Prime Minister from St. Martin. Uh, he's doing the Prime Minister Schoof was traveling around the different Caribbean islands, sort of familiarizing himself with the Dutch Caribbean, and he toured mostly the projects that the NRPB, the money that the country received after Hurricane Irma, um, and he looked at how the money was spent and what's the update on the projects. And actually, even by the dump now, they've started cleaning around the dump. They had moved people that were close to the dump so that they could have facilities for preparation and also for safety as they start working on the solid waste program at the
Mhm.
dump. So it was interesting. I had a chance to ask him a couple of questions, but honestly, I felt like you can't ask too detailed questions because he's not going to be that familiar with it. But I did ask, one of the things that the objectives of the NRPP program was to also make St. Martin more resilient, build back better,
Mhm.
good governance. And I asked him, I said, it's easy to look at the physical construction. That's great, and it was necessary. The airport, the the hospital, the all those types of schools, those kinds of roof repair projects, for sure, good to see. I said, but the soft side of it is hard to assess. Is St. Martin really more resilient? If we have another major hurricane, is St. Martin more better prepared than it was when Irma hit? And so I felt like I got a bit of a political answer, and basically saying, I've the prime minister saying, he's met with the council of ministers and he has full confidence that the government has the intention to and wants to work on those soft sides of being more resilient. And so I didn't press him too hard because he's here for
So
a few hours, and yeah.
I will add this comment, and then we'll wrap things up. Um, I think if we're anywhere more resilient, I can't say that from a public perspective, we are more resilient. But I think from a private perspective, I know that
Yes.
this radio station is way more resilient, and we were pretty resilient before
Right.
than we were before Irma in terms of fewer windows, lots of shutters, protected generator systems, less reliance on things on the roof of the building and things underground, with backup systems, et cetera, et cetera. And I know at my own home where I'm way more resilient now, and we're pretty darn resilient after Irma or with Irma. Um, but when I look generally across, I mean, I'd like to believe the airport is stronger and better than it was before Irma. I,
It's hard to know.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. They say the roof is better. Who knows, right? Um, do the roads feel like our drainage is better? No.
No.
Have we put more stuff underground than we had before? Yes. Is the power plant more resilient? I'm not so sure.
Right. And does government have, an emergency fund? Because afterwards you're going to need money for recovery.
Yeah.
No, we're going to be knocking on the door of the Netherlands again if there's a major disaster. I mean, look, we had to do that just for the engines for GB. So, and that was my question that I was trying to drive to him, as that, in the end, yes, the physical reconstructions happen, but the soft side, in my opinion, has not, from a government side. So.
Emil Lee, thank you so much. St. Martin Insights news that matters to you. We'll see you next week. At least
on the phone.
Yes.
Good to be here.
Miracle of telephony.
Yes.
We'll be right back.